In a world of gaming where graphics and storytelling are the forefront of pretty much every game coming out these days, and where every indie developers are trying to cram down our throats the theme of depression in 1,000 different ways, or by how this cute little beaver is a serial murderer, and only after completing this game on an extra spicy hard mode do you unlock the lore that he's also a nonce as well. I often sit back and wonder if gaming has lost its touch in the one reason why it got so famous in the first place. Is it fun? Now, this is obviously a bit of an exaggeration on my part, but just sit back and think about it for a second. How many gaming developers just put fun first in front of everything? Back when you could count each individual pixel on a video game, developers didn't care about, well, much really, but the one thing they did care about to a certain level was how fun the gameplay was. Remember, a lot of the NES library are just ports from arcade machines, things designed to keep children entertained, otherwise they get no money. If an arcade machine was shit, you just say, okay, I'm not going to spend my money here, I'll go somewhere else. Now, you could say this was all because they didn't have the right software to even make a compelling story, and yeah, you'd be completely right. But games like Contra, Mario, Zelda, Life Force, Castlevania, Punch-Out, Ghosts and Goblins, Battletoads, and Donkey Kong didn't have time to give you a complex, deep, allegorical masterpiece of a story about why Mario was a doctor. He just was, and the gameplay was what kept people playing and what keeps people playing to this day. The SNES, I'd say, was definitely the turning point in gaming as a whole. You now had this system that still wasn't incredibly advanced, but was just advanced enough where developers could start making their games more complex. So you've got a very healthy mix of both heavy story-centered games and just fun, feel-good games. And then boom, the entire market exploded and we got the N64, PS1 and 2, the Dreamcast and the GameCube, each console redefining what gaming could be, from the graphics to the size and scope of the games to the new genres that were now created. And that brings us to today, where gaming is by far the biggest form of entertainment out there, and pretty much anyone you talk to is a quote-unquote gamer. But I think during that time something was lost in translation. It stopped being about how can we make this a fun and rewarding experience, and more about how we can make the graphics more realistic and how we can create this incredibly gripping narrative but then never actually tell it to our players. And of course, these things aren't bad. Games like Red Dead Redemption 2 were able to show me just how far we've come graphically, and the first time seeing this game, I was honestly speechless. And games like Dark Souls cannot be described with words, they just have to be played. You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this, and it's because the game Dark Messiah of Might and Magic might just be the funnest game ever conceived, and I want to tell you about it. So first, a brief history. Might and Magic is a fantasy role-playing game and is one of the earliest of its kind. The first coming out in 1986 and was available on pretty much every console around at that time due to its popularity. It had sold over 100,000 copies by 1989 and was getting 5 stars across the board for its sense of scale, its wealth of content and non-linear play. And so Might and Magic took off and released, I feel like, one too many games. I mean, at one point they were releasing these games almost yearly, which really puts into perspective how much effort they were probably putting into each of them. One of the things that struck me about this series is how little each game changed, both graphically and interface wise. For example, for the first 8 games, this interface barely ever changes. Take for instance the jump from Link to the Past to Ocarina of Time, one of the biggest jumps in gaming history. And whilst there was a bit of mess in the game, there is still a reason why it's called the best Zelda game of all time. Or the jump from Elder Scrolls 2 to 3, or from Resident Evil 3 to 4, and the list could go on and on. These were games that took risks and evolved and are now immortalized by it. But in the time that it took from Link to the Past to Ocarina of Time, which was 7 years by the way, Might and Magic have released 5 new titles, each of which had less and less good reviews to their name, and they still hadn't done a fucking thing about the interface. So I think you see my point. Evolution in video games is a very important process, but it seems like Might and Magic just wanted to stay in the same place, which ultimately led with its death. Which then brings us to 2003, when 3DO, after long years of losing money and making shit role-playing games, finally went bankrupt, where they were then bought by Ubisoft, and yes, I know it sounds bad, but trust me, this was the best thing that could have happened to them. Ubisoft then allowed Arcane Studios, the same people that made the Dishonored franchise, Prey, Deathloop and the worst Wolfenstein games, to create the first new Might and Magic game. One that would be completely disconnected from the series and would give Arcane Studios the complete freedom to do whatever they wanted. And so, on October 24th, 2006, Dark Messiah of Might and Magic finally got released to a very deserved good reception. Both the UK and Australian critics talked about its sheer fun factor, great mechanics and graphics, but did critique the kind of lack of story. But then America came along and for some reason just shat all over the game. OneUp.com gave it a 4 out of 10, citing off a bunch of criticism, and then dubbed it, and I quote, "The Adventures of Sir Kixalot Deathboot in the Land of Conspicuously Placed Spike Racks." So it's clear from these reviews that the game was heavily praised for its graphics, gameplay and sheer fun factor, but falls behind when it comes to glitches and story. I will of course be addressing them, so I think it's time that I actually talk about the game. So strap in as we explore the dark messiah of might and magic. We're treated to a very cool cutscene of a mysterious yet definitely evil character releasing some demon on the world, all the while a strange prophecy is read in the background. We're then thrown into the title screen, where I feel like this is where I should get my first gripe with the game out of the way. I know, we haven't even loaded up the game yet, but if I get all the bad stuff out the way first, it makes room for the praise I'll be giving it. You cannot alt-tab this game. Yes, you probably guessed this game uses the Source engine used for games like Half-Life 2, which is notorious for completely destroying a game if you alt-tab, but this game is on a whole different level. If you alt-tab at any point for any reason, even if it's for a split second, the game will instantly shut down. No glitches, no graphical difficulties, it just instantly shuts down. And whilst I'm at it, I may as well talk about another big problem with this game. It crashes. Crashes are common in this game, and it's just something you have to live with. They can happen at random, whether you're loading into a new area, if there are too many enemies attacking you at once, or if the game just decides to. The game can just crash, and even though this game does have autosave in some areas, it can be really annoying to have to start all over again just because you forgot to manually save. There's no real way to combat or fix it, and because of how random it may be, my only advice would just to be saved constantly. Okay, now that that's all out the way, let's talk about everything else incredible with this game. The start of this game has us running about a dungeon and acts as a tutorial showing us how movement works, about the combat system, and how to use your environment to your advantage, and magic. This tutorial is also really fluid and helpful, never feeling like it's being too obvious and pandering, and letting you discover and experiment by yourself. We're then shown a cutscene of our main character interacting with his mentor slash kind of father figure Femrig, who sends us on a mission to deliver the Shantiri crystal to his friend Menelag because they share a mutual interest in an artifact called the Skull of Shadows. He also summons this spirit woman who possesses you so she can guide you on your journey and subtly flirt with you every step of the way.
You did it! I'd hug you if I could. Don't believe any of it, dear. I'm a friend, an ally, and I could be even more. Careful with this body, Sareth. I've got uses in mind for it, you know. Brilliant. You know, if it had been me, I would have thanked you properly.
Gee, do you think she wants to fuck me? So you set off to the kingdom of Stonehelm and the undead attack, and so begins one of the best, most frantic intro sequences to a fantasy game I've ever played. Move over Skyrim with your frankly pretty shit opening, the drawbridge lifting up making you think there's no escape, the Cyclops, who is just such an incredible design, bursting through the gate, having to climb up the chain to escape, the fact that there is actually an undead chasing you whilst you run away, you manning the turret and fighting back against the Cyclops. It's also fast paced and so well done. So after defeating the Cyclops, you head over to the gates of Menelag, where you meet his niece Lyanna, who brings you inside to meet Menelag himself, who, just like Femrig, is obviously hiding things from you about your mission, but there's not much we can do about it, so I guess we should just go to sleep. We're going to need a lot of rest for tomorrow's expedition, you know, and oh, for fuck's sake.
Prepare yourself.
I'm going to see if the master is alright.
So it turns out during the night the undead have breached the city and are everywhere, so we need to quickly get to Menelag and the crystal before anything bad can happen. This is the first part of the game, apart from the tutorial, that you come against actual foot soldiers, so I think it's a good time to talk about the combat because it's so good. Instead of getting locked into a battle stance of attack, block, like in most games, this game encourages movement and uses your environment to your advantage. The game cleverly forces you to do this by making its enemies actual competent enemies who don't stop their guard if they're being attacked. If you spam an enemy with attacks, 9 times out of 10 they'll just keep blocking it and never let their guard down. So you have to start getting creative. You can run around and hit them from behind or just from side to side. One of the game's other mechanics is kicking. Kicking your enemies mid-fight is a great way of disarming them so you can get in a few more hits. You can also kick them into spikes plastered around the maps, instantly killing them. And it's just so satisfying. That's what this awful joke was referring to from before, by the way. And yes, you could do the classic critic line of, this doesn't make any sense. Why are these spikes all around the map? Did the spike goblin put them there? I say, fuck you, it's fun, and I will continue to kick enemies into spikes for as long as I live. You can also pick up objects in your area, such as crates and barrels, and send them hurtling at enemies to knock them back. These aren't the only ways of combat though, you also have magic. Magic in this game is so satisfying and fun. As you level up in in the game, you get skill points which can be used to upgrade your melee or ranged attacks, and your stats like stamina and your magic abilities. The game also balances these things out really well, leading to so many possibilities for what your character can actually do. You don't have stupid skill trees or perks or anything. You could be a sword wielding fire mage or a long range ice mage. It's really up to you. And you never really have to commit to anything, meaning you can switch it up when you get bored. And the different magic in this game, despite it being quite simple, is really fun. You have projectiles such as freeze and fireball, you can have stat spells such as healing, magic barriers and weakening enemy defenses, and there are a few miscellaneous spells such as telekinesis allowing you to pick up certain objects and hurtle them at enemies, and charm allowing you to turn enemies onto your side. There's also dark vision, which is by far my least favourite. It allows you to see in the dark, but instead of just lighting up the area, it turns everything a bright blue for some reason. It also can't be turned off, so even if you're done with it, you just have to wait for it to stop working for your vision to go back to normal. As I said previously as well, the environments this game sets up are great for combat. You have the classic spikes and barrels to hurtle at enemies, but you also have destructible support beams to drop barrels on enemies, or in one section of the game you have a chandelier that swings back and forth, instantly killing enemies if they fly into it. Stuff like this is throughout the entire game, and it's just really cool to discover it all. Another thing I also love about this game is its inventory. Unlike in most games when you access your inventory, time doesn't fucking stop, everything just carries on as normal. They made the inventory so easy to use with it being small and in the middle of your screen, so even though the game can get a little bit clunky when using spells as you have to equip back your shield again when you want to use it, the game makes this as easy as possible and I really commend it for that. So anyway, getting back to the story, we traverse the castle only to find that Menelag is being attacked by a mysterious character, and even though he's able to push him off, he's ultimately killed by an undead. The undead then steals the crystal and runs away, and it's now our job to run after him. And this fucking section, it's probably not shown while in my recording because I kept messing it up, but the first time I played this section I didn't fail a single time and it was so fun. Jumping from rooftop to rooftop, having to quickly adapt to new areas and find a way around it so the undead doesn't get away, it's just so good and I'm such a fan of it. So anyway, you sneak into Arantir's lair where he's hoping to open a necromancer portal using that Shantiri crystal, and we come into a section that absolutely blew me away when I first played it. The sword room. Now, please hear me out. This is a room in this area that is completely inconspicuous and never pointed towards, that houses a sword building set, in which you actually have to build the sword. You have to pick up the iron bar, put it into the pot, then use this thing to blow up the heat to melt the iron, then pour it into this mold, then press the lever to cool it. You then need to put the blade you've made into the fire again to make it malleable, and then stick it on an anvil, bang it a few times with a hammer until it gives a good shape. Then finally bring it over to the hilt maker to give it a hilt, and voila, you've now made a longsword. A weapon that up until this point you will have never come across. And like I said before, the game never tells you about any of this, you just have to use your common sense and you're rewarded pretty well for it. It's not the best weapon in the game or anything like that, but it certainly gives you a better advantage over your enemies. An advantage that isn't too ridiculous that it's impossible without. I'm sure you could continue this part of the game with only a short sword and it'd be completely fine. This is just a cool... Well, it's not even an Easter egg, it's more of a cool place you can discover, and with the right amount of common sense you can get rewarded for doing so. So we spend the rest of the game hacking and slashing our way through enemies in different locations, and I would say that this could get pretty repetitive, but it really doesn't. It's so fun and addictive. I found myself playing for hours at a time and not even realising it. The way that they design the enemies makes it feel so fluid and like a real fight. I mean, for fuck's sake, enemies move out of the direction of your projectiles if you fire them from far enough. I don't even think modern games have that feature. So fast forwarding a bit, we get to the temple, place the Shantiri crystal where it needs to be and kill an orc leader. We then find the Skull of Shadows and a very interesting plot thread is revealed. You see, we're treated to another cool cutscene of the actual big bad of the game coming to see you in a vision, and in true Star Wars sense reveals that he is your father. We also learn that Arantir wants to sacrifice the entire population of Stonehelm in order to permanently seal away Cabaleth. You know, this guy. So you're now probably sitting there thinking to yourself, so wait, the main bad guy we're facing right now is actually trying to seal away the actual main bad guy for good, and we're trying to stop him? And yeah, you'd be right. This is where the game gives you the choice. You can either join with your father and basically unleash hell upon the world, or seal him away forever. And the 4 endings come into play because before all of this you have to choose which girl you want to be with. The demon girl Zana or Liana, your companion for most of the game. And then the alternate endings basically have you betraying them or teaming up with them to beat Cabaleth. And even though it definitely gives off the edgy, I'm actually the bad guy in this story and I've got this hot babe with me whilst I do it, I still find it cool how your active goal throughout a good chunk of this game is to stop the good guys from sealing away the bad guy. And that's the end of The Dark Messiah of Might and Magic. I didn't try to talk about every single aspect of this game because I want others to be able to experience it too. The game currently is £4.29 on Steam and is available on other platforms such as Xbox 360. The game's about 10 hours long in length, so if you can excuse the crashes and being unable to alt-tab, then I definitely recommend it to anyone who can appreciate a game that wasn't just made to show off an incredible graphics or a deep and convoluted story, but all in all, just to be fun. I've been Caslo. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.
Cause I'm feeling like I'm running and I'm feeling like I gotta get away. Better know that I don't and I won't ever stop. Cause you know I gotta win every day. She really wanna pop me. Just know that you will never flop me. And I know that I gotta be a little cocky. You ain't never gonna stop me. Every time I come a nigga gotta set it, then I gotta go and then I gotta get it, then I gotta blow and then I gotta shut it. Any little thing a nigga think that he be doing, cause it doesn't matter, cause I'm gonna dead it. Then I'm gonna murder everything and anything about it. Boom, about a bing. I gotta do a lot of things to make it clearer to a couple niggas that I always win and then I gotta get it again and again and again.